On today's bonus edition of the Locked On Suns podcast, why the Phoenix Suns lost to the Boston Celtics on Saturday night, despite strong performances from Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal, and does this team have any shot against Boston, or is it just a bad matchup?
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 7 seasons, a writer at Suns.com, and the host of the Just Basketball Show wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen here on this Saturday night into Sunday morning, wherever you are finding us. If it is your first time or you just haven't hit that button before, hit follow or subscribe wherever you are getting the show. Get a new episode in your feed every single Monday through Friday. We are free and available everywhere, including YouTube. Become an everydayer. Get locked onto the Phoenix Suns all year long right here with this show. Today's episode brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right. Just got home off the light rail and a little bit of an earlier tip, so I guess not too bad. Disappointing loss, double digits, and the Suns pretty much trailed wire to wire. And that's why we're going to start with the moment of the game that's a little bit earlier than normal. Sometimes it just ends up being the fourth quarter, and there's no way around breaking that part of the game down. In this case, we're going to go to the second quarter, the beginning of the second quarter. On Thursday night's recap episode when the Suns beat Toronto, I looked at the start of the fourth quarter and made a big deal about how important it was that the Suns were able to basically play the Raptors to a draw in the beginning of that period with Durant off the court. And I pointed out how Vogel kept Durant off for maybe longer than he would have liked to or longer than he typically would, and that the Suns pretty much held their lead. I think the lead shrunk by 1 point, but it was 6 full minutes. That did not happen tonight. Didn't really happen in the fourth quarter, but it was especially pronounced in the second quarter, where Durant goes to the bench and a lineup of Beal, Gordon, Bol, Drew Eubanks, and different guys, Grayson Allen at the beginning, Royce O'Neal at a certain point, Nurkic comes in. The deficit went from 5 to 11. So the Suns were down 5 at the end of the first quarter. By the time Durant checks in the second quarter with 5 minutes and 27 seconds left to go, they're down 11. In those 6.5 minutes, the Suns only mustered 11 total points. So they were on pace for about 20 points in this quarter. And a lot of things went wrong here that I think really were emblematic of the overall issues. Unless Bradley Beal was able to get around a screen effectively and hit a tough shot, mid-range jumper, floater, contested layup, punishing Luke Kornet, the Celtics backup center, his drop defense, the Suns were not going to score. They did not score. So that's why they only got 11 points. They also had several ugly turnovers here, just sort of unexplainable, not the boneheaded ones that we've seen at times in the fourth quarters, especially with this team, not telegraphing an entry pass or being lazy with an outlet pass or an inbounds pass, but just avoidable mistakes, right? And the Celtics are hitting the offensive glass. So it really was just everything kind of started to go wrong. Pritchard gets an offensive rebound. A couple minutes later, Kornet gets an offensive rebound. And on top of that, again, let me see how many turnovers there were. The Suns had 1, 2 turnovers in this stretch. Just a lot of incremental mistakes and unstructured offense. And I would say that's probably, back to the if Beal couldn't make a tough shot thing, that's really what doomed them. The turnovers are an offshoot of that. And everything stems on the offensive end with this team a lot of the time from the fact that they just don't have flow. They don't have any sort of coherence to what they're doing. There was a possession that I feel like was just about as bad as it got, about maybe all game, but really just drives home what I'm describing in this particular portion of the game, where Eric Gordon gets off of a make. So they're inbounding the ball. They inbound it to Gordon, which even when the Suns were having their turnover, can somebody just walk the ball up the court and enter the ball to Durant mistakes and issues earlier in the season, even then they never inbound the ball to Gordon. So even that was uncharacteristic. He jogs it up the left sideline. I believe ends up drawing Kornet out, or no, I actually think it was Hauser. And kind of dribbling the air out of the ball for a few seconds and then just pulling up from 3. So the ball ends up in the wrong guy's hands off of the inbound. He doesn't make any attempt to run any sort of offense, and he takes an incredibly difficult shot in a game where he did not have it going. That is just like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like a domino of things that should not be happening. And you zoom out, the Suns actually won the minutes that Beal was in the game by 1 point. They lost the minutes when Durant was in the game by 1 point. So they won it back somewhere. Maybe it was the beginning of that fourth quarter, actually. But this stretch, again, the lead got to double digits, and it pretty much stayed there throughout. They fought. I'm not trying to take that away from them. Durant, 45, 10, and 6. Beal, 25 and 4. Even Nurkic had a pretty solid game despite getting sent to the bench at times, and they gave themselves a chance. But once again, these moments where not all of the big three are on the court and some lesser players are out there doomed them. So let's talk a little bit about those lesser players, and in particular, why this Celtics team is such a bad matchup for the Suns, because they will be facing them within the next week. We'll get to that next. First, today's show brought to you by eBay Motors. Our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Basketball host Josh Lloyd to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week all season long. Whether you're prepping for a daily draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. So let's check out this week's eBay Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week from Josh Lloyd. Number 1, Kyle Anderson. Cat. Hurt. Kyle Anderson, currently the starter. We'll see if that lasts, but ride the hot hand. Kelly Olynyk, also an injury fill-in, even more productive than Kyle Anderson typically. Rebounds, assists, threes, points, blocks sometimes. Olynyk can get you all of that. Vasilija Micic out in Charlotte, filling in for LaMelo Ball after being traded there in the Hayward deal from Oklahoma City. Just a starter where points and assists are going to be racked up. Duop Reith, DeAndre Ayton did come back on Saturday night, but we know Duop Reith can fill it up from deep. We saw that up close from a Sun standpoint earlier in the season. And last but not least, Kyle Lowry. D'Anthony Melton's still out in Philadelphia. Lowry went there on a buyout, has been producing in a fairly big role. I love eBay Motors, and Josh Lloyd from Locked On Fantasy Basketball is going to help you win your fantasy championship. eBay Motors knows a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit, and it's the same with your vehicle. Once again, I love eBay Motors. I have bought a sunshade, just the flip-down thing on the driver's side to block the sun out of my eyes as I'm driving around the valley. I have bought a wheel cover, which fell off randomly, just a screw loose or something at one point, and I looked a little weird having 3 of those instead of 4. Was able to find exactly the right fit for my car at eBay Motors. So with 122 million plus parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly with eBay Motors. Whether that is a brake kit, LED headlight, roof rack, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, with these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Why did the Phoenix Suns struggle with the Celtics? Why is Boston a tough matchup for the Suns? Obvious major caveat that Devin Booker was not in the game. Another caveat, only a 10-point loss, and close enough in the fourth quarter that I don't think anyone feels like this was a disaster. But I think there were very obvious ways that Boston, the way they play, the personnel that they have, the level of poise and execution that they play with, did pose problems for the Suns that Booker can't fully fix, and could flare up again on Thursday, I guess. So let's start with some of the obvious, right? Size. It's not that Boston is necessarily, and Porzingis didn't even play tonight either, right? But it's not that Boston is necessarily bigger than the Suns by any means. It's kind of the way that their size exists, right? They have Horford and Porzingis, so you can't fully play tiny against them. This isn't the Thunder or something, or the Clippers at times in the past. But then Tatum, Brown, Holiday, those three especially, they're big wings. So offensively, if they do decide to drive, you're going to have a hard time corralling them. Defensively, the versatility is there. And then even in the big man spots, Luke Cornett posed a huge problem for the Suns today, where their backup center, for a lot of teams, that becomes a smaller player, somebody who maybe is a one-way player, somebody who's very offensively inclined or very defensively inclined, but rarely both. Cornette's a limited player, but because the Suns don't necessarily run sophisticated stuff to attack certain players in isolation, they're not really able to do that, and he just frankly is too much of a handful for Eubanks to deal with. So that's just some of like the physical size reasoning there. I also think the fact that they have not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 downhill scorers really puts the Suns at a disadvantage. I mean, they were doing what they could, I would say, right? I think guys like Grayson Allen, Bradley Beal, Eric Gordon, they were playing physically. They were trying to cut off drives. They were trying to have active hands. The Suns tried a zone, especially when Bull was out there. Nurk is obviously always prowling on the back line. But with the drive and kick style that the Celtics play, it's just asking a lot of the Suns, who don't have a lot of length for help defense and don't have a lot of high-level cutoff men, not baseball cutoff men, but what I mean is guys who can kind of cut off drives, prevent opposing players from getting to their spots. They don't really have that. So if Boston is just determined and consistent with everything, they probably feel pretty confident that they're going to get a good shot eventually, whether that is a drive that just results in a layup or free throws, a kick out for three, the second guy attacking the closeout and getting downhill. Like, inevitably it's going to work because you just don't feel like the Suns have enough to prevent it because of the four-headed monster that Boston has. The other part of what we saw tonight that I think can be a problem, although I think the Suns have been good at it at times, it just didn't really go their way tonight, is that the Celtics control the transition game. They're like 10th or 11th in transition offense. They're first in transition defense. And you really saw that tonight, right? The Suns technically had more fast break points, but only 12. And I think the more telling stat is that the Celtics had 12 turnovers, and the Suns were only able to convert that into 8 points. And the Celtics turned 15 Suns turnovers into 16 points. It just really wasn't a factor in the game. And you compare that to Tuesday against Denver, the Suns had, I thought, very high-level transition defensive game. And I guess maybe not a ton in that game necessarily, but in the playoffs last year against Denver, for instance, the Suns running, and the Clippers for that matter, the Suns running, especially Booker, became a really huge advantage. It wasn't against the Celtics because that's an aspect of how the Celtics play that is just tough to handle. I guess to kind of circle back to the size thing and where that leaves us, is maybe better than saying size from a center standpoint, is just to say, I'm not sure the Suns have any center who really makes sense against Boston. Because, as I was just saying, the Suns aren't really the type of team that's going to make Kornet miserable, make him pay for being out there. The Celtics will make bigs like that pay for being out there. And Nurkic is a perfect example of that. Boston is not a great rebounding team, so you would think Nurkic could abuse them there. But if he's not able to really play on defense consistently for long stretches without being pulled into a switch and exposed, then he's not really able to use his strengths of being a rebounder. And it starts to be pretty circular. And then obviously Eubanks had his struggles, as he does a lot of nights, whether that was against Kornet or just generally speaking. And you could easily imagine this series becoming largely about how Durant plays at the 5. And there's just too many matchups like that for my comfort, personally. But it's going to be the Suns' only option at times. And this is certainly one of those times. We'll see how they can fix some of this. We'll see how Booker helps when these two teams face off again on Thursday night in Boston. But let's close out the show talking a little bit about this rotation and some of the margin plays that, again, Boston tends to win and how those stacked up to hand the Suns an L. First, today's show brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. I myself was hired by a job posting on LinkedIn. It's not just another job board. They have a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals. I obviously had an account on LinkedIn in the first place, which is what allowed me to see the posting to become a media commentary writer at Awful Announcing, which is what I do for my day job. Was able to find the hiring managers that were in charge of hiring. They were able to know that I was a qualified candidate and that they should answer my messages, and they did. And it all makes hiring very easy when you have a lot of transparency, a lot of high-profile people able to see what you want, and a ton of candidates in your pool, thanks to LinkedIn's significant user base. So easy. All of this is that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours using LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. Try it for yourself. Find your next perfect employee. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Let's close it out looking at the rotation here. Now, I think the obvious place to start is Eric Gordon. I mentioned him in that second quarter stretch, the ISO ball play that he had that was just a train wreck. You know, Bill Simmons, who everybody knows, has this saying or this sort of analysis of older players, guys that get into kind of their mid to late 30s, where they can be good once a week. It feels like that's where Eric Gordon is, right? I've covered this plenty of times, but you have to remember where things ended up with him. The Clippers traded a first-round pick that hilariously became Cam Whitmore, who I think is proving himself to be a very, very high ceiling player in this league in Houston, for Gordon at the deadline. They had the ability, when they made that trade, to have him for 2 years, which I'm sure is part of why they gave up a first-round pick. They have him in the building for the last 25, 30 games of the season and into the postseason, and they just cut him. That's how he ended up being a Sun. And I think it's because of the same thing we're seeing. He just wasn't going to be worth the $15 to $20 million that he was making because he just isn't consistent enough. Now, on a minimum contract, you're totally fine with that. If Booker plays in this game, we probably don't care that much what Eric Gordon does because maybe that's the difference for the Suns to be able to win. And plenty of other guys had solid games between Bull and Beal and Durant and Nurkic. But really with Gordon, you just see it in the lack of impact at all. 3 total shots taken, in 29 minutes. And there's games where he does get steals or he can, get some rebounds from time to time at, maybe a few free throw attempts. Like, we know the difference, and you really can tell from just the box score, not to mention some of the defensive problems that he had. He's a very easy scapegoat because of this inconsistency, but plenty of Suns fans online were like, bench him, get him off the team, whatever. I can't really fault you in this one. So that was the main guy who posed issues. But the other one that I think is just worth looking at a little closer is Saben Lee as we do our bench mob vibe check here. The Suns' offense so far this season with Saben Lee on the court has a 110.7 offensive rating. Just to put that into perspective, if you were to compare that and just say that's a team, Saben Lee on the Suns is its own team in the NBA. That team would rank 27th in offense in the league, behind or ahead of Charlotte, Portland, and Memphis. That's it. It really falls off a cliff. He had one of the worst stretches, I would say, of offensive basketball that I would say an NBA player can have. In his 4 minutes, he missed 2 threes, one of which he overshot so much from the wing corner area that it hit the other side of the backboard square and on the way down. It basically soared all the way past the hoop, smacked on its downward trajectory into the backboard and just caromed back down toward the ground. He also had an offensive foul and a turnover, which I guess that was the offensive foul. And he didn't see the court again. David Roddy comes in, and once again, the Celtics say, great, we'll leave him open as well. 3 threes, 0 makes. So with Okogie and Booker both out, there's probably not a good solution there. Thad Young is not, as much as I would say, why not try him against instead of Eubanks? Maybe not in this matchup. I understand Cornette had a huge game. It'd be kind of dumb for me to point that out and then also say Thad Young should have been playing center for this team off the bench. I don't think he should be playing point guard or wing either, which is what Saban Lee and David Roddy play. So I don't know if it's that simple. I don't really think Ish Wainwright would have been much better personally. But at the end of the day, maybe the answer is just, yeah, I mean, it's just, there's not a lot you can do right now. Durant, O'Neal, Beal, and Allen are all playing 37-plus minutes. Gordon didn't play well. What are you going to do? You got to have some smaller guys out there at a certain point. So maybe it's inevitable, but it was a big issue tonight for sure. Let us look at some of these smaller plays as we wrap things up. I mentioned the offensive rebounds in that second quarter. Boston wins that battle 13-10. Turnovers, they win it 12-15. And they outshoot the Suns 15 of 39 for Boston, just 9 of 31 for Phoenix. Could have brought this up when we were talking about the reasons the Suns don't match up well with this team, but I'll just mention it here. I mean, this is true of almost every team. I think the Suns winning at least being effective in the transition game against Denver was a big part of why they won. You have to win one of these little battles. You have to out-rebound your opponent or out three-point shoot or free throw shoot your opponent or limit your turnovers and have that margin favor you. But if you're losing all of them, you're going to lose the game. The margins are too tight. The league is too good. Every team has star players. We can say the Suns will just kind of talent their way into wins. They will do that. They can do that even in the postseason. But frankly, it's not going to work 4 times out of 7. And these things have to be cleaned up. I think to the Suns' credit, they've done a good job over the course of the season cleaning them up. But in this game, they went 0 for 3, let's say, and obviously had some of these other issues that I talked about. So no matter how you slice it, this one just got away from the Suns. I think you would have to expect a better role player performance in the future in a home game. Maybe we don't see that on Thursday in a road environment, but Booker will be back. They won't need as much from the role players, and we'll see how this all breaks down. I will be back tomorrow with Brandon Duenas talking a little more about this game, I'm sure, previewing the road trip and more. Hit follow or subscribe wherever you're finding this show to get that episode and 5 more throughout the week in your feed wherever you're finding us. And I will catch you guys